Discover surprising stories and unforgettable moments. Subscribe now to Beyond Fame and find out what happens beyond the spotlight. Have you ever had a moment in life that changed everything in an instant? For Mina, a young waitress working at a small but cozy restaurant in Seoul, life was a constant cycle of long shifts, low wages, and dreams she had almost forgotten. She worked tirelessly every day, serving customers with a polite smile, even when she was exhausted. One evening, as the restaurant buzzed with the usual chatter of diners, a man walked in quietly. He was dressed casually, with a cap pulled low over his face, and he took a seat in the far corner of the restaurant. He didn't demand attention, didn't call the waitstaff impatiently, he simply sat there, waiting. Mina, carrying a tray full of empty dishes, noticed him and approached with her notepad. "Good evening, sir. May I take your order?" The man looked up briefly and smiled politely. His voice was calm and warm. "Just a bowl of ramen and a cup of tea, please." Mina nodded, scribbling down the order. Something about him seemed familiar, but she couldn't place it. Shrugging off the thought, she hurried to the kitchen to place his order. As the night went on, Mina kept an eye on the quiet customer. Unlike others who were loud and demanding, he simply enjoyed his meal in silence. He seemed lost in thought, occasionally glancing at his phone but mostly observing the atmosphere around him. When it was time for the bill, Mina approached his table with a small smile. "Would you like anything else?" He shook his head and reached into his pocket, pulling out a sleek black wallet. "Just the check, please." Mina handed it to him and stepped back, waiting for the usual routine of card swiping or cash counting. But when he returned the bill folder, something caught her eye. Inside was a thick stack of cash, far more than the cost of a simple meal. Mina's hands trembled as she counted. It was 50 times the price of the meal. Her heart pounded. "Yes, sir. I think there's a mistake." The man smiled again, standing up. "No mistake. You work hard. You deserve it." Before she could process what was happening, he adjusted his cap and walked toward the exit. It was only when her coworker rushed over that reality hit her. "Mina, do you know who that was?" She turned, still holding the cash in disbelief. "Who?" Her coworker's eyes widened. That was Kim Soo-hyun. Mina's breath caught in her throat. Kim Soo-hyun? The famous actor? The man who had just left her the biggest tip of her life? Her legs felt weak as the realization sank in. And before she knew it, tears began streaming down her face. Mina stood frozen, clutching the bill folder as tears welled up in her eyes. Kim Soo-hyun? The world-famous actor? The kind, quiet man who had just left her the biggest tip of her life? Her coworker nudged her. "Mina, are you okay?" She blinked rapidly, trying to compose herself. I had no idea it was him." Her hands trembled as she looked down at the cash. This wasn't just a generous tip, it was life-changing money for someone like her. Her coworker let out an excited gasp. "You have to post about this. Can you imagine how many people would freak out knowing that Kim Soo-hyun left a massive tip?" But Mina hesitated. She glanced toward the restaurant door, where he had just disappeared into the night. He hadn't asked for attention. He had left quietly, without expecting anything in return. She took a deep breath and shook her head. "No. I don't think he did this for publicity." Her coworker raised an eyebrow. "You're seriously not going to post about it?" Mina wiped a tear from her cheek and smiled softly. "No. I just want to remember this moment for what it is." Her coworker sighed but nodded. "Well, at least let's tell the manager. He's going to flip when he finds out a celebrity ate here." Mina took a shaky breath, still trying to process everything. She wasn't sure what she wanted to do next. All she knew was that her heart was overflowing with gratitude. As the restaurant slowed down for the night, she finally took a moment to sit in the staff area, staring at the money in her hands. She thought about how hard life had been recently, how she was barely making ends meet, how she had considered quitting this job, how she had felt like she was stuck in a never-ending cycle of struggle. And yet, in just a few minutes, everything had changed. She whispered to herself, "Why me?" Just then, her phone buzzed. She glanced down and saw a message from an unknown number. "Unknown, Mina, I hope the tip helps. Keep working hard. You deserve good things." Her breath hitched. He knew her name. Her fingers trembled as she stared at the message. She had no idea how he had gotten her number. But the thought that Kim Soo-hyun had personally reached out to her made her tears fall again. She quickly typed a response. "Mina, thank you. I don't know what to say. This means more to me than you can imagine." For a few moments, there was no reply. She figured he was busy. He was, after all, one of the biggest celebrities in Korea. But just as she was about to put her phone away, another message popped up. "Kim Soo-hyun, there's something else. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? I have an idea." Mina's heart stopped. Meet him? Her pulse raced. This night had already been unbelievable, but now, it seemed like things were only getting started. Mina stared at her phone screen, her heart pounding. Meet him? Was this really happening? Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she tried to think of what to say. What could Kim Soo-hyun possibly want with her? Was this some kind of joke? Taking a deep breath, she finally typed back. Mina, yes, but why? The reply came almost instantly. Kim Soo-hyun, I'll explain when we meet. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. Grand Seoul Hotel lobby. Mina's breath hitched. The Grand Seoul Hotel? That was one of the most luxurious hotels in the city. What was he planning? She wanted to ask more questions, but something in his message told her that he wasn't going to reveal anything until tomorrow. Still overwhelmed, she placed her phone down and exhaled. Her emotions were all over the place: excitement, nervousness, confusion. But deep down, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The next morning, Mina woke up earlier than usual. She wanted to look presentable but not overly formal. After all, she had no idea what this meeting was about. She settled on a simple white blouse and black pants, tying her hair into a neat ponytail. As she stepped out of her tiny apartment and made her way toward the Grand Seoul Hotel, she kept replaying the events of the previous night in her head. By the time she arrived at the hotel lobby, it was 9:55 a.m. She glanced around nervously. The place was stunning: golden chandeliers, polished marble floors, and well-dressed guests moving around with confidence. Mina felt out of place. Just as she considered turning back, she heard a familiar voice. You made it. She spun around and froze. Kim Soo-hyun stood there, dressed in a sleek black suit, looking effortlessly elegant. Unlike last night, he wasn't hiding behind a cap or sunglasses. Mina gulped. This is real. He smiled at her. Come on. Let's talk somewhere private. She hesitated but nodded, following him as he led her to a small lounge area with plush seats. The moment they sat down, she couldn't hold back her curiosity. What is this about? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kim Soo-hyun leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Mina, I don't normally do this. But I saw something in you last night. She blinked. Saw what? He smiled slightly. Determination. Hard work. Someone who doesn't give up. Mina swallowed hard. She wasn't used to being recognized for anything other than just being another waitress. I don't know if anyone has ever told you this, but I think you're meant for something more than just waiting tables, he continued. And I want to help. Mina's hands gripped the hem of her blouse. Help how? Kim Soo-hyun reached into his pocket and pulled out a small white envelope. Inside this is a letter, he said. It's a personal recommendation from me. Her heart stopped. A recommendation for what? She whispered. He slid the envelope toward her. A chance at something bigger. Open it. Mina's hands shook as she carefully unfolded the letter inside. The moment her eyes landed on the words, her breath caught in her throat. It was a job offer. Her vision blurred as she read through the details. The offer was from a luxury hotel restaurant, one of the best in the country. The position? A personal trainee under the head chef. Mina's mouth went dry. This can't be real, she stammered. Kim Soo-hyun smiled. It is. I have friends in high places, Mina. I told them about you, and they're willing to give you a chance. If you want it. She stared at him, completely overwhelmed. A job like this could change her entire future. And it was being handed to her by one of the biggest actors in the country. Mina's hands trembled as she held the letter. Her eyes darted over the neatly printed words, reading them over and over again, trying to convince herself that it was real. This is unbelievable, she whispered. Kim Soo-hyun leaned back, watching her reaction with a calm expression. It's not unbelievable. It's an opportunity. Mina's chest tightened. But why me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm just a waitress. There are so many people who deserve this more than I do. Kim Soo-hyun tilted his head slightly. That's where you're wrong. I saw the way you work, Mina. You don't just serve food, you do it with care, with dedication. That's not something everyone has. She swallowed hard. No one had ever said something like that to her before. But, she hesitated, gripping the letter tightly. What if I fail? Kim Soo-hyun gave her a reassuring smile. Then you'll learn. But I don't think you will. Mina looked down at the letter again. The luxury hotel restaurant in the offer was a place she had only dreamed of working at. The head chef was well known in the culinary industry, and being personally trained under him was an opportunity that only a handful of people ever got. She thought about her life up until now, the exhausting shifts, the rude customers, the feeling of being stuck in a cycle of struggle. And now, sitting across from a global superstar, she was being given a way out. A chance to build something more for herself. She took a deep breath. If I accept this, when do I start? Kim Soo-hyun's smile widened. Tomorrow. Her stomach flipped. Tomorrow? That's so soon. The world doesn't wait, Mina. If you want this, you have to be ready. Mina's heart pounded in her chest. She knew this was too big to refuse. She had spent years watching opportunities pass her by, telling herself that she wasn't good enough. But this time, maybe she was. She exhaled shakily and looked up at him. Then, I accept. Kim Soo-hyun nodded approvingly. Good choice. Mina could hardly believe the words that had just left her mouth. Just yesterday, she had been a struggling waitress trying to make ends meet. And now, her entire future had just changed. Mina's hands were still shaking as she placed the letter back into the envelope. The reality of what had just happened was starting to sink in. She wasn't just going to work another shift at her small restaurant. She was stepping into a world she never imagined she could be part of. Kim Soo-hyun checked his watch and then looked at her. I'll have someone from the restaurant contact you this evening with details. You should take the day to prepare. Mina nodded slowly. I will. For a moment, silence filled the space between them. She still couldn't believe that one small act, serving a quiet customer without knowing who he was, had led her to this moment. She met his gaze. Why are you doing this for me? Kim Soo-hyun smiled. Because someone once did the same for me. Mina's breath caught. Really? He nodded. Before I became successful, there was a time when I doubted myself. When I thought I wouldn't make it. But someone believed in me. And because of that, I got my chance. She stared at him, realizing that despite his fame and fortune, he understood exactly how she felt. Kim Soo-hyun stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. Now it's your turn, Mina. You've been given a chance. The question is, what will you do with it? She swallowed hard and rose to her feet. "I won't waste it," she promised. He smiled again. "That's what I wanted to hear." As they walked out of the lounge area, Mina's mind raced with emotions. She had come here thinking she would just say thank you for the generous tip. Instead, she was leaving with an entirely new future ahead of her. That evening, as Mina sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the letter again, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello?" A professional voice came through. "Good evening, Miss Mina. My name is Chef Park, and I'm the head chef at the Grand Seoul Hotel restaurant. I've heard great things about you." Mina's heart leaped into her throat. "I'm looking forward to meeting you tomorrow," he continued. "Your training will begin immediately. Are you ready?" Mina gripped the letter, took a deep breath, and smiled. "Yes. I'm ready." She had no idea what awaited her. But one thing was certain, her life would never be the same again. Mina barely slept that night. Her mind raced with excitement and nervousness, replaying the events of the past 24 hours. How had her life changed so drastically in just one day? When her alarm went off early in the morning, she sprang out of bed, feeling a mix of anticipation and fear. She chose her outfit carefully, something professional yet simple. She wanted to make a good first impression. By the time she arrived at the Grand Seoul Hotel restaurant, her heart was pounding. The place was breathtaking, elegant chandeliers, polished marble floors, and uniformed staff moving efficiently. She had worked in restaurants before, but nothing as luxurious as this. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. Immediately, a man in a crisp chef's uniform approached her. His presence was commanding, yet his expression was calm. "You must be Mina," he said. "I'm Chef Park, the head chef here." She bowed deeply. "Yes, sir. It's an honor to be here." He studied her for a moment before nodding. "Follow me." Mina walked behind him as he led her through the massive kitchen. It was nothing like the small, crowded kitchen from her old job. Here, everything was organized, spotless, and filled with professionals working with precision. "This is where you'll be working," Chef Park said as he stopped in front of a stainless steel counter. "Your training starts today." Mina swallowed hard. This is really happening. He placed a knife in front of her. "First lesson, knife skills. Show me what you can do." Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the knife. The other chefs watched her, some curious, others skeptical. She knew they were wondering the same thing: why was an inexperienced waitress here? Mina took a deep breath, steadied herself, and began slicing. The room fell silent as she worked. She wasn't perfect, but her movements were careful, precise. She had spent years preparing ingredients in her old job, even if no one had ever noticed. When she finished, Chef Park inspected her work. After a long pause, he nodded. "Not bad. You have potential." Mina felt a wave of relief. "But potential isn't enough here," he added. "You'll have to work harder than you ever have before." Mina met his gaze and nodded firmly. "I understand. I'm ready." Chef Park studied her for a moment, then smirked slightly. "Good. Let's see if you can keep up." Mina exhaled. This was going to be the hardest challenge of her life. But for the first time ever, she felt like she belonged here. And she wasn't going to waste this chance. Mina's first day in the kitchen was brutal. From the moment she picked up the knife, it was clear that this wasn't just another restaurant, this was a battlefield. Orders flew in non-stop. The heat from the stoves was intense, and the chefs moved like precision machines, each step calculated, each movement rehearsed. Mina was thrown into the deep end. She was expected to keep up, no excuses, no mistakes. "Faster, Mina," one of the chefs barked as she tried to plate a dish. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked. She wasn't used to this level of pressure. She looked over at Chef Park, who was watching her closely, his sharp eyes evaluating every move. By the end of the shift, her legs ached, her arms were sore, and her apron was stained. She had never felt so exhausted. But she had also never felt so alive. As the kitchen finally slowed down, Chef Park approached her. "Not bad for your first day." Mina exhaled, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Thank you, chef." He crossed his arms. "But this is just the beginning. If you want to stay here, you'll have to prove that you can handle it." She met his gaze and nodded firmly. "I will." Some of the other chefs chuckled quietly. "Let's see how long she lasts," one whispered. Mina heard them, but she didn't let it shake her. She had come this far. She wasn't going to back down now. As she left the kitchen that night, she pulled out her phone. A message from an unknown number appeared. "Unknown, how was your first day?" Mina's eyes widened. She quickly typed back. "Mina, it was intense. But I made it through." A few seconds later, the reply came. "Kim Soo-hyun, good. Keep going. I believe in you." Mina smiled to herself, a wave of motivation rushing through her. She wasn't alone in this journey. And no matter how hard it got, she wasn't going to quit. Because this was her chance to change her life, and she was ready to fight for it. The days at the Grand Seoul Hotel restaurant were unlike anything Mina had ever experienced. Each shift was a test of her endurance, skill, and patience. The kitchen was a high-stakes world. One mistake could ruin a dish, 1 second too slow could throw off an entire service. Mina had never worked harder in her life. She woke up before sunrise, practiced her knife skills, studied the recipes of the head chef, and stayed late to clean and observe the more experienced cooks. At first, some of the other chefs doubted her. She was the outsider, the girl who had arrived with a recommendation from a celebrity instead of years of training. But Mina refused to be just a recommendation. She proved herself by working harder than anyone else. She listened, she learned, and she never complained. One night, after a particularly grueling service, Chef Park called her over. Mina wiped sweat from her brow and approached, standing straight. "Yes, chef?" He looked at her, expression unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he smirked. "You've lasted longer than I expected." Mina couldn't help but chuckle breathlessly. "So did I." The head chef nodded. "From now on, you'll assist with plating dishes at the VIP section." It's a small step, but an important one. Mina's heart soared. VIP service was where the most exclusive guests dined. It was the next step toward becoming a real chef. She bowed deeply. "Thank you, chef. I won't disappoint you." Chef Park simply nodded before walking away. Mina exhaled slowly, her chest swelling with pride. That night, as she walked home, she checked her phone. A message from Kim Soo-hyun was waiting. "Kim Soo-hyun, I heard you got promoted." Mina smiled as she typed back. "Mina, yes. VIP section. It's just plating, but it's a start." A few seconds later, his reply came. "Kim Soo-hyun, every great journey starts with a first step. Keep going." Mina looked up at the night sky, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Just a few weeks ago, she had been a waitress struggling to make ends meet. Now, she was on the path to something bigger than she ever dreamed of. All because of one unexpected act of kindness. She smiled to herself. This was only the beginning. If you've made it this far, type "keep going" in the comments.